So we managed to persuade, it was mainly the British government, to transfer all this implementation capacity to the local council and then work to build the capacity of the council to plan the development, so decide on their priorities, not what we thought should be done, and then make the case for investment in those priorities. And then every year, the donors, i.e. the British government, would come to Zambia, they would sit on one side of the table, and it wouldn't be us sitting on the other side of the table, it would be the development secretary. And we would have helped the development secretary with their planning and so on, but they would make the case for what they wanted the government to fund. And it was such an inspirational thing to be a part of. And it has shaped the way I think about development ever since. So it absolutely was our intention right from the very beginning not to do anything that made us a permanent part of the solution.
Okay, thanks so much, Simon, for joining me for a second take on our conversation. I'm looking forward again to going through the conversation, and again, apologize for not hitting record the first time. There's a lot of reasons why I'm excited to talk to you, most notably to talk about Colalife, as well as your vast experience founding organizations to do good. But I thought maybe where we could start off is back in I believe it's in the 80s in Zambia, where you were doing some work, and where the initial idea for something like Colalife came to you. So maybe you could start by at that point.
You're right. It was the mid 80s. I was working for the British aid program in northeast Zambia. It was a very remote part of the world with an average of 2 people per square kilometre, where slash and burn agriculture was, a perfectly sustainable way to grow crops because there were so few people. And I was really amazed that the remote places I went to, I could always get a Coca-Cola in the local community village shop. And then, after that amazement, I became more aware of the issue of child mortality. I'm not a health professional. And it was awful in those days. 1 in 5 children didn't make it to their 5th birthday. And then you dig a bit deeper, and bear in mind this digging happened before the internet and before Google, so it took a while. I found out that the second biggest killer, and it's a very close second to pneumonia, the second biggest killer of under 5 children was diarrhea. And then digging a bit further, again over many weeks, found out that actually the treatment of diarrhea is really quite straightforward. It's oral rehydration salts, ORS. And now, latterly, we recommend that the child receives zinc supplements as well. And so these are cheap, stable ambient temperatures, just like Coca-Cola is, and they are needed in these remote areas. So the question was, well, how come you can buy a Coca-Cola wherever you go, but you can't get life-saving medicines? And that's where our name Colalife comes from. So we came up with the idea of, or I should say we, I'm not, this isn't a royal we, this is an actual we, because I always work very closely with my partner in life, Jane, and she's also my partner in Colalife. So we came up with this idea of co-distribution, and the logic was very simple. If we put this medicine, oral rehydration salts and zinc, in the same crates that the Coca-Cola was in, if the Coca-Cola got to these remote places, the medicine will get there too.
Right. Simple.
Yeah. So that idea sat there for a couple of decades because I finished up in Zambia. It was very difficult in those days to promote ideas. There was no such thing as Facebook or anything like that, and getting in contact with Coca-Cola was impossible. It never ever got past the receptionist.
Mm-hmm.
So we're back in the UK now. About 20 years go by, and our Prime Minister at the time, Gordon Brown, this was just before the financial crisis of 2008, he launched this thing called the Business Call to Action. And what the Business Call to Action was about, it was about trying to get particularly big multinationals to look at the way they operated to make their profits. He didn't want them to make less profit. He just wanted, or was suggesting, that they went about their business in a more socially conscious way, in a way that maximized their social impact. And a founder partner in the Business Call to Action was Coca-Cola. So all of a sudden, I saw an opportunity to re-engage with Coca-Cola on this idea of, I say re-engage, we hadn't engaged at all, but to successfully engage with Coca-Cola on this idea of co-distribution. So again, I tried to contact them, but it was hopeless. I couldn't get the attention of anyone with any decision-making powers, and so decided to set up a Facebook group so it wasn't just Jane and myself banging on about this idea, but we had a group of people behind us. So I set up this Facebook group, and it was very blandly named. It was something like, "Let's talk to Coca-Cola about saving children's lives," just a general thing like that.
Right.
And the idea was that we would develop the co-distribution idea within this group. Other people would be able to contribute, and there would be a movement, a lot of people behind the idea. And that's what happened very quickly. We got to about 8,000 members on this group. And way back in 2008, that was a lot of people to have on a Facebook group.
Yeah, right.
So that got the BBC's attention, because I also went onto their online forums, which they were operating at the time, and we are suggesting that this idea was debated on the BBC. And they agreed eventually. It took a few attempts, but they agreed. And I went into this interview thinking it was all going to be about me or Colalife, or Colalife hasn't been created at this point, but the idea. But of course, the BBC always get two sides of an argument. So to my surprise, as halfway through the program, a statement was read out from the global head of stakeholder relations in Coca-Cola, a person I would never have been able to get in contact with myself, saying, "Yes, very interesting, let's talk." Now, his name was Salvatore Gabola. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He very tragically died a couple of years ago. But anyway, he was the global head of stakeholder relations, but as it happened, he operated out of Brussels. He was an Italian. He operated out of Brussels, so we managed the whole thing from there. And Brussels was just a train trip away from me. Yeah. So off I went to an invitation by him to lunch. He talked to me about how he'd engaged Greenpeace and the World Wildlife Fund previously, so extremely experienced, and gave me all sorts of hints and tips about how to engage Coca-Cola on this issue. And the main one being link into something Coca-Cola was already doing, i.e. the business call to action. So that got us linked up with the right people in Coca-Cola. We used to meet with them every month or so. It was a virtual meeting, and about 2 or 3 meetings in, we thought we'd better get explicit approval for putting medicine in their Coca-Cola crates. So we asked the question, so it's okay, isn't it, that we run a pilot, we run a trial where we put medicines in Coca-Cola crates? They said, yes, but what's the value chain? What's your value chain? And we sort of avoided that question and carried on talking. A couple of weeks later, we had another meeting, and same thing. So it's okay, is it, that we put medicine in your Coca-Cola? Yes, but what's the value chain? So at that point, Jane and I thought, well, we better look up this thing called the value chain, because obviously it's important. And so we did. And then the penny dropped about why Coca-Cola gets everywhere and medicines don't. And basically, it's the value chain. What Coca-Cola do is they create aspirational products, or at least they create products and make them aspirational through clever marketing to the people they want to actually buy the product. And then they put the product into the distribution system at a price that enables everyone along that along the value chain, essentially, to make a margin, and for it still to be affordable for the majority of people at the end of that value chain, at the end of the distribution chain. So we applied exactly the same principle to a diarrhea treatment kit. And people used to pull our legs, how can you possibly make a diarrhea treatment kit aspirational? And our response to that was, well, if you can make brown fizzy water aspirational, you can make a diarrhea treatment kit aspirational. So we put a lot of time into consulting with users, finding out what the challenges they face treating diarrhea in the home, and we learned so much. Now, either that hadn't been done before, or it had been done before and people haven't taken any notice. Because the sort of things we learned were the sachet sizes of oral rehydration salts are too big for use in the home. They make up too much solution, and you've got to throw away what you don't use after 24 hours. So if you follow the instructions as a mother, you would make this liter of water safe, which involves boiling, which involves fetching charcoal. The water's probably come 2 kilometers as well. Then you mix it up, and then you've got to throw away what you don't use after 24 hours, which means throwing away most of it, actually, because the jar won't drink a liter. So we made smaller sachets. We incorporated the measuring functionality for those smaller sachets within the packaging itself. And we consulted our users or our customers, the people we wanted to become our customers. We consulted with them on branding. How do they want the thing to look, and what they want to call it? And that so we invested in the product design. So we had something we knew people would want. Then we asked them how much they'd be prepared to pay, and from that we worked out what the price would need to be leaving the factory, because we knew the margins that retailers would expect to make. We knew the margins that wholesalers and distributors would want to make. So by knowing the willingness to pay figure, what people were prepared to pay, you could work out what the ex-factory price needed to be.
So that's how much you had to get it made for and out of the factory.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, we consulted with a local manufacturer, and there's no way we can we could do it for that. So we subsidized initially the trial because the volumes were low. We subsidized that ex-factory price. So actually, nobody knew about the subsidy at all, except the manufacturer.
Right.
So the value chain we ultimately wanted to achieve was in place right from the very beginning. And the relationships were in place. No one was expecting anything for free or anything to be subsidized. As far as they were concerned, they were buying it from the factory. They were distributing it as they normally do. They were making a margin. The retailers were buying it. They were making their margin. All that behavior was normal behavior, and we didn't interfere with it. And we sold from a standing start in 2 remote rural areas, or I say we sold. Retailers sold or bought and sold 26,000 kits from a standing start in 12 months.
Oh, 12 months. Wow.
Yeah. So we had, and we increased the coverage. In other words, the number of cases of diarrhea that got the right treatment from less than 1% before we started to 45%.
Right. Well.
So we had an exciting prospect ahead of us. All we had to do is work out how to scale it up. Of course, what happened was, because of this learning from Coca-Cola, we didn't need the co-distribution because it was the value chain that did it. And Jane came up with this phrase: it wasn't as the space in the crates that was important, it was a space in the market for a desirable diarrhea treatment kit
Right.
for treating diarrhea in the home. So we turned to scale up, and we ploughed in all the learning from the trial, i.e., we don't need co-distribution. The price is about right. We kept all the branding that people wanted. We kept the price. We kept the measuring functionality that people liked. We kept the small sachets, although we reduced them in number because people didn't use the 8 that we provided in the trial. They only used 4.
Mm-hmm.
So we halved the price of the ORS by halving the number of sachets. And we changed the packaging. So the packaging no longer had to fit between the bottles, Coca-Cola bottles and crates, and reduced the cost of that. So in that review process, we eliminated the need for the subsidy. So from then on, there was no subsidy, and the kit was produced locally. The other important thing is that we were never a customer. So we were a foreign body. We were actually the catalyst in this situation. We had no intention of being the part of the permanent solution.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to bring existing systems together, strengthen them where necessary, so that when we left, the system would carry on by itself.
Okay.
So we had a viable system, we had a viable product. We just had to get it launched and get the sales up. So we raised more money from donors, and we put that mostly into a marketing campaign, a launch campaign. And we justified ourselves getting heavily involved in that because it was a one-off activity. It was going to be covered during the 3-year scale-up phase. And throughout this whole thing, I should say, and it's very important to say, that the Ministry of Health were in charge. In other words, they chaired our learning and steering group, as we called it, which brought together all the implementation partners and anybody else, actually, who were interested in what we were doing. And we met quarterly, right from the very beginning, even though initially our focus was on the private sector. What we were doing was about improving health, and public health was under the Ministry of Health. So it was important that they were involved right from the beginning. But what that meant was, of course, is that they could see the outcome of the trial. They could see the enthusiasm of people around the idea, around the product. And so when it came to scale up, they engaged and became a customer. So we helped the manufacturer produce a version of the kit, the ORSZCO kit.
Mm-hmm.
We had a commercial version of that already. We've done that. We've used that during the trial. Now we produced the same kit, but formatted for the government. It could go out through the public sector, the government's distribution system, into government health centres and be given away free. And now, how many years on? 10 years on, we came out of Zambia about 7 years ago. But 10 years on, 85 to 90% of all the kits, we call them co-packs because they contain ORSZCO, all the co-packs, 85%, let's say, of all the co-packs that come out of the local factory are actually bought by government.
Wow.
But it still is available in the private sector as well. If you go to the biggest supermarket in Zambia, ShopRite, which is nationwide, you'll see it on the shelves there. So the free kit is available just to a mother, usually, or a parent or a caregiver, when they go to the clinic with a sick child. So you have to get to the clinic and have a sick child to get the free one. The commercial one is available to anybody who can get to the local supermarket. They can just buy it, so they can buy it buy it and have it in the home
at home
before diarrhea strikes, which they know it will.
Right.
And the two products rub along quite nicely together because the government, although they buy huge volumes, it is like a huge volume and then nothing.
Right.
So a huge volume might keep this factory going flat out for, say, 6 months, 7 months of the year. The private sector, although it's much lower volumes, keeps the factory ticking over all the time.
Right.
So the knowledge and the systems and the products stay, current, ready for the next windfall from the government. Because that's what tends to happen. Government orders are very large, and they come, or sometimes they don't come. But the two, and they rub along together as well because they're supplied through different channels, and they're available to different people. You don't need a sick child to go to the supermarket to get the kit there, but you do to get one free from the health centre.
Right. I have just one question. Going back to the manufacturing process, which was subsidized in the beginning, and then you mentioned that you did some design alterations, which enabled you to remove the subsidy. Is that because you worked with the manufacturer to reduce the costs in the manufacturing process, or is it that you changed the packaging? And so, how exactly did you go about doing that bit? Because I could see that must have been a critical piece of the sustainability of the whole system.
Well, the best way I can do that is to show you. So
Sure.
you have to edit this because I'm gonna have to lean across and get.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Let's do
it. Yeah. So this was the kit that fitted between the crates.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I can see. So it sort of fits in between the bottles like that.
Yeah, underneath here, it's quite a complicated shape.
Oh yeah. Right. I can see.
Between the bottles.
Yeah.
And earlier on, I was talking about the branding. We came up with all sorts of clever logos and all sorts of things, but what mothers wanted was a literal picture of a loving mother and child. That's what they wanted.
Okay.
Kit Yamoya, we had tip top tummy, we had all sorts of stuff. Kit Yamoya means roughly kit of life.
Right.
So this is how it looked. And you can see that's it. And so inside it had oral rehydration salts.
Yeah.
Those are the 200 ml sachets there. And it had zinc that was imported from Tanzania. There was no local zinc in Zambia when we started.
Right. Okay.
And you can't really see it, but in the top here, you can just see it there. There's a bar of soap.
Yes, right. I can see that.
It's separated by a lid, which acts as a tray for the soap. So the soap is separated from the medicine, and that was a stipulation by the regulatory authority. They didn't want soap in with medicine.
Sure.
So that's
lovely
the original
design.
one.
Right.
This is what it looks like today. Rough. So it's
right.
the same branding,
so
the same name. The colours have changed, but it's flat. This is a gusseted bag. It's a gusset in the bottom.
Right.
And on the back here, you've got, it's not very clear on this one because it's been changed now. You've got the 200 mil marks.
Yep, I can see
there,
that.
And there and there.
Yep.
And there are two of them because people will be holding this in their hand when they measure the water because often there's not a tabletop.
Yeah.
And when you pour water in the top here, the weight of the water expands the gusset at the bottom. And when the water touches both marks at the same time, that's about 200 mils.
Got it.
So that's the water you need the sachets are in there, as you can see.
Yeah, right.
This is now not, the zinc is now not in a box. It's just in like a light proof blister pack, and that's being locally produced.
Got it.
So the work during the trial, the manufacturer could see an opportunity to manufacture zinc. We had nothing to do with that. We helped them with the packaging, but they took that decision themselves. We didn't subsidize that at all. They just did it. So when it came to scale up, they had their own zinc to put in the kit.
Okay, so that solves some of the cost. Did they pass some of the cost savings on to you?
Yeah. Also, this has soap. This one has soap in.
Yep.
We dropped the soap because the local revenue authority, Zambia Revenue Authority, said to us, well, actually, that soap is vatable. It's subject to VAT. So if you have soap in there, you're going to have to put VAT on this. Which, given that price is so crucial, we couldn't do. So the soap went out.
Okay.
We did for a time have this version, although it's been phased out now.
Right.
This was again, locally manufactured jar. We call it a screw top, though. Right. Same contents, same branding, much better measurer.
Right.
Cup as well. Children will drink from this.
Yeah.
But and this was like a premium product.
Yeah,
compared to this.
It looks like it.
Side by side.
Yeah.
This one had the soap in it, but this one very soon the soap was taken out.
Right.
But this one has been discontinued now. It's just a bit too expensive for people, I think, and the volumes are really low.
Right.
Now, I said we talk. A key thing about this one, and this one, is this transparency of the packaging.
Right. Why is that?
Which means that the branding can be carried on this information leaflet.
Right.
When you take this out, well, let me see. I've got a spare leaflet here. I can show you. But when you take it out, it's got the instructions on how to use the ORS and how to use the zinc.
Sure. And why is that important? Because it saves on.
Because then the government said we want the same kit. So all the manufacturer had to do is change this leaflet.
Right.
Everything else stays exactly the same.
Exactly. Yeah, I see it.
And it also makes it recognizable. I mean.
Yeah. Right.
So if someone gets given this which one is it? gets given this one at the health centre, then they can go and buy this one from the supermarket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. And what would be the the US dollar equivalent of the price that people were paying at the end?
It's about $1, just under $1.
Right.
And it still is just under $1 after all this time. But of course, it's gone up in price massively because of inflation locally in Zambia.
Locally, right.
So these were about 5 kwacha. Well, they were 5 kwacha when they came out. They're now about 20.
Right.
But still, it's about $1.
And each step along the value chain, people who are providing transportation are taking a little piece, and the distribution channel is taking a little piece, and then the manufacturer, and everyone's happy.
Yeah.
And at the end, it costs $1. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
No, really, really impressive. And so you built this organization. From when you first started doing your tests in Zambia to when you left, how much time was that?
Well, we moved to Zambia at the end of 2011 in the anticipation that we would get funded.
Right.
But we were being funded locally by the UK Development Agency's office in Zambia. And they had indicated strongly that they were interested. So we moved to Zambia in October 2011. We got underway in December 2011.
Okay.
And then the trial ran for a year from about August 2012 to August 2013.
Right.
Before the trial ended, we had a good indication that this was going quite well. So the British government and Johnson & Johnson, who funded us, agreed to some transitional funding so that we didn't have to stop. We could move into the scale up. And then the plan was to get proper funding, in inverted commas, for a national scale up.
Right.
And we failed 3 times to do that. We went to USAID, and again, we were encouraged, and we were told not to worry, they hadn't forgotten about us, but in the end, they didn't fund us.
Right.
Grand Challenges Canada, again, been very supportive during the trial, and funded part of the trial. We didn't meet their criteria in the end for national funding. And what was the other one? Oh, and then Comic Relief. Jane has just shouted at me across the kitchen. Comic Relief was the other one, which again that didn't work. So we wasted a lot of time, and we were struggling basically to keep the thing going.
Okay.
We had no money to market it. The manufacturing kept going, but we had no money to launch the product. So then we just had to be opportunistic, and we went for some local scaling up nutrition. It was called scaling up nutrition sun funding. So we had to twist it a bit to fit that funding, because that was about nutrition rather than about health. And then we got some other funding from UK Aid, which is based in the UK here, to scale up in ORSZCO province.
Right.
So we never got national scale up funding. And the sun funding, the scale up nutrition funding, was aimed at really difficult to reach areas, which actually wasn't that wasn't very suitable for our model, because our model requires there to be an operating market.
Right.
So it was there that we, under the sun funding, that we introduced the government branded pack.
Right.
Yeah. So we never really. So to answer your question about how long we were there, so then in about 2005, we had to come back home, because the money had run out.
Right.
And the funding we did have was not enough to support us in Zambia. So we then we managed the London-based funding, but it was all transferred basically to Zambia to fund the work going on there.
Right.
The Sun program funded our local NGO partner directly.
Right.
So that's how that worked. And then we went to Zambia 1 month in every quarter.
Right.
And in between those, that face-to-face time, we were supporting the 2 projects remotely.
Okay.
Which is pretty easy to do, because the people who are going out supporting the retailers, supporting the community health workers, they all had Android tablets, so all the data was in the cloud, and so we were you could very effectively support people on the ground, even though 2/3 of the time we were back here.
Right.
And then in 2018, all the funding stopped, so both of those projects ended.
Right.
We had our final steering committee meeting with the Ministry of Health, and said goodbye to everybody. So it was lovely last year to go back for the first time in 5 years, just to see, for we knew pretty much how it was going, because we haven't lost contact with people.
Right.
To see it face to face, and see that this, in 2023, 1 million of these kits were bought by the government.
That's fantastic.
Free distribution. So, and just as a background, I mean, when we started, the number of cases, so this is in 2012 now, we did a baseline survey before we started. The number of children that were getting, or number of cases of diarrhea that were being treated with ORS and zinc, was less than 1%.
Right.
The National Health Survey, called the DHS, the Democratic Health Survey, of 2019 showed that 34% of cases of diarrhea were being treated with ORS and zinc. So that's from less than 1% to 34% in 5 years. And now we're just waiting for the results of the 2023 DHS survey, because we think it will go up even higher because the volumes of kits leaving the factory has gone up since the previous DHS. And this, by the way, is despite of COVID.
Right.
COVID completely disrupted health systems.
Sure.
Particularly in less developed countries.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in 2020, at the beginning of COVID, the government having bought hundreds of thousands of these before COVID, they bought none of these
in
that year. Because COVID, everything was going into COVID.
Right.
But since then, it's picked up right back up again. So during that year, the only kits being produced would be the ones going to the private sector.
Right.
So another example of why the private sector is really important, sitting alongside supply to the public sector.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so based on this success, you would imagine that you would have gone from Zambia and then decided to spread this idea to many other places, and you're on the path to world domination. But in fact, I read recently that Colalife is closing down this year. How do those two things exist together?
Well, let's go back to 2018, 2017, 2018. The scale up was well underway,
Mm-hmm.
and the pressure was on to do what you've just described. Where's next? Where's the next country? And of course, so you do your calculations, and you work out that 1 in 4 Africans live in Nigeria. Nigeria's got the worst diarrhea problem in Africa, so that's obviously where you go next.
Right.
So we drew up a huge plan of how we would go to Nigeria to do the same thing, and then all of a sudden. We thought, and it was pretty much all of a sudden, we thought, hang on a minute, is this really the right thing to do? Right. We'd have to go to Nigeria. We'd have to, and the message would be, hello, Nigeria. Would you like to try out this same thing that they've done in Zambia?
Right.
It would still be under sort of trial type in the innovation space. It wouldn't be mainstream.
Yep.
And also, it's not our job, to do this. Actually, this needs to be done by local systems, maybe with help from outside, just to get things going. But it's not our job. So we decided to completely change track. We had 2 or 3 consultants working with us, by the way, on this plan from McKinsey and somewhere else.
Right.
So it was difficult to then say, hang on. I think this isn't the right way to go. What we should be trying to do as a tiny charity is we should be trying to change government policy. Oh, sorry, not government policy. Yeah, we should be trying to change government policy, but we should do that by changing global policy. So we persuaded a group of extremely clever people to come with us on this journey of writing an application to the WHO to make co-packaged ORS and zinc the standard treatment for diarrhea.
Right.
And we were successful. So in 2019...
And sorry, just so I understand, what was it before? What was the standard before that?
Before, it was initially, way back in the 1980s that we're talking about, the recommendation was oral rehydration salts. And actually that you should make them at home.
Right.
Mixing salt by yourself. The recommendation then became oral rehydration salts in sachets, both in hospitals or in institutions and at home.
Right.
Only make it yourself if you can't get the proper stuff in sachets.
Right.
Then in 2004, it became ORS and zinc together.
Right.
But that never, even today, the coverage of ORS and zinc globally is about 18%.
Right. Okay.
So the recommendation's been there for 20 years, and we've only got to 18%.
Okay.
So And given our experience in Zambia and the experience of other people elsewhere, co-packaging is just the obvious thing to do, because if you have a co-treatment of ORS and zinc, in order to deliver that, you both have got to be in stock.
Right.
And if there's only 50% that ORS is in stock, and that's generous, it's probably less than that normally, and 50% chance that the zinc is in stock, you've only got a 25% chance that they're both in stock.
Right.
So before you even start, you're up against it, and then you're assuming that the person dispensing knows that they're supposed to give both,
right,
which they often won't.
right,
And also, you've got the situation where you'll have 50 mothers lined up with children with diarrhea. You've got a limited amount of ORS and zinc. Do you really give both to the first few mothers and then nothing to everybody else? It's just not going to work if it's not co-packaged. So that was the argument we made in 2019, that the recommendation for treatment stays the same, but it should be presented as a co-pack rather than individually, because we pointed out the recommendations have been there for 20 years, it wasn't 20 years at that point, but it was 15 years, and it hadn't been taken up. So something needed to change. So that's why it was accepted, or one of the reasons why it was accepted. So now the message to Nigeria is not, hey guys, what about trying out this cool idea from Zambia?
Right.
The message to Nigeria is, how are we going to implement this new global recommendation?
Co-packaging ORS and zinc.
Completely different proposition to that, and so that was definitely so now. Well, what we did after that was we formed this informal network across the world, snappily called the ORS Zinc Co-Pack Alliance, which shortens to ORSZCO, which is much easier to say.
ORSZCO.
And ORSZCO brings together individuals and organizations who are interested in accelerating the uptake of this new global recommendation. History tells us that the new WHO global recommendation will filter down eventually, but it will take decades.
Sure.
ORSZCO is there to see if we can make it happen a bit more.
Accelerate that.
Yeah. So we launched ORSZCO in 2022, I think it was, and that I'll send you the link to that. So that will continue. But like you say, Colalife is closing down.
Right.
In fact, if there was such a concept for us as working days, this would be the last working day of Colalife.
Is it really? Wow.
Because it closes on Sunday. And it closes because we've basically done what we set out to do and a load more. And, there's a limit to what a two-person organization can do.
Sure.
ORSZCO is the way forward in terms of promoting this new global recommendation. We've helped get that in place. The scale-up in Zambia is working just fine. In fact, it's going from strength to strength. So there really is no need for Colalife to exist anymore.
Wow. It's a fantastic story. It's a fantastic story for what you managed to achieve in that time. But I think more importantly, and maybe what's even more interesting about it, is the way you went about achieving this. Let me ask you, was it always your plan to have an exit, to leave the problem behind, to have solved the problem, and or because that's not the usual thing that you see in this sector. Often organizations are there and they're planted and they're trying to survive. Was that always a part of what you were trying to achieve?
It always was. And the reason it was is it goes back to the 80s again.
Yeah.
The project I was working on in Zambia was initially called, when I joined it, it was called an integrated rural development project, and it was basically a World Bank model for development.
Yep.
And in our case, it was a project staffed by expatriates like me, and we all had our local counterparts, and we had a massive workshop. We had graders, we had lorries, to transport materials. We could repair machinery, all as part of the project. We arrived, there was a group of us, and we said, this is ridiculous. 2 kilometres up the road was the headquarters of the local council, the district council. It was in a place called Mpika. And that district council had a development secretary and a director of works and lots of people who did roads and bridges. But they had no money, no machinery. In fact, the director of works had anthill growing in his office. Right. And he couldn't even sort that out.
Right.
And he sat there while these expatriates with their counterparts went up and down in these lovely vehicles with all the graders and everything, building the bridges and repairing the roads. So we managed to persuade, it was mainly the British government, to transfer all this implementation capacity to the local council and then work to build the capacity of the council to plan the development, so decide on their priorities, not what we thought should be done, and then make the case for investment in those priorities. And then every year, the donors, i.e. the British government, would come to Zambia, they would sit on one side of the table, and it wouldn't be us sitting on the other side of the table, it would be the development secretary.
Be them, right.
And we would have helped the development secretary with their planning and so on, but they would make the case for what they wanted the government to fund. And it was such an inspirational thing to be a part of. And it has shaped the way I think about development ever since. So it absolutely was our intention right from the very beginning not to do anything that made us a permanent part of the solution. We would engage on anything through local systems, helping strengthen them where necessary, helping, making the case for policy change where that was required, not going against policy. As I say, working through local systems, working through the local, obviously working through the government, that's the first thing, but the local regulators, local manufacturers, distributors, etc., etc. So our role was always going to be a catalytic role. Now, I should caveat that by saying, of course, if we weren't from outside the country, if we were embedded in the country, we could quite legitimately have taken a different approach and sought to become the solution, or at least part of the solution.
Right.
But we're not.
Right.
And we never were going to be.
Right.
So it's really important for people like us who are trying to help in a way that really does help and doesn't suck talent out of local institutions for a short period while a project runs, leaving those institutions weaker than they were before. Then when the project goes, everything goes back to what it was before, or even worse. So you're right to say that what you do is important, but how you do it is probably more important. Certainly if you want sustainable change.
Yeah, no, I can see that. It's interesting because the experience you're describing is in the 80s or mid 80s, and in today's sector, you hear a lot of people talking about the ideas of decolonization, the idea of really trying to get the get the actions performed by the local organizations, the local people, and acting as a support or enabling system for those local people. So clearly, what is it now? 40 years later, there's still this same problem. Why is it that has not caught on? Why is it taking so long for there to be change in this kind of a challenge? It seems very logical to me.
Yeah. No, it's complicated.
Right.
And of course,
Yeah.
people like to take credit, for giving money or,
Sure.
especially taxpayers' money. But the damage that does is incredible. I mean, just reflect on this for a moment. This is the product that's now it's being scaled up. And this is the government one. There is not a Colalife brand isn't on there.
Yeah.
There's no donor branding on these products. If there was donor branding on these products, or the branding of some foreign entity, it would completely change how these products are perceived.
Okay.
This one last year came second in the Proudly Zambian Product of the Year. Now, it wouldn't have got that award if it had UK aid written on it.
Right. Sure.
Advertising.
That's so subtle, but it's really important, isn't it?
It's really important. During during the scale up that we talked about and the launch, we had billboards, we had radio jingles, we had TV adverts. None of them had any reference whatsoever to the people who are helping, the external people who are helping this, because our objective was to create something local. And I didn't say create; it was local. It was local right from the very beginning. So it's rather unjust, just because donors provide the money. I say just. I mean, money is important, isn't it? But
sure.
That they should have their branding everywhere. They need to find other ways of, justifying their investment to the taxpayers back home. And you can do that. I mean, Colalife, although none of the caregivers in Zambia would know of Colalife. None of the retailers would know us. The wholesalers don't know us.
Right.
The manufacturer knows us, but that's all. And the Ministry of Health and other key strategic partners know who Colalife is. No one else does. And where was I going with this? But globally, people do know about us. We're all over the place.
Right.
We're interviewed on BBC and by the World Service and by American radio and so on and so forth. So we do have a big profile, but it's in the appropriate place where we need to, show our supporters what we've done.
Yeah.
Where we need to justify, what we're doing to our donors, but we don't have to push it into people's faces right down on the front line, because it damages what you're trying to do. It damages the sustain, or it makes what you do almost impossible to sustain, because the moment that branding goes and there's nothing left. And and if you think, for example, if you're looking at because a lot of people talk about institutionalization and building and strengthening institutions. But if an institutional strengthening project is called the USAID Institutional Strengthening Project, it feels wrong.
Yeah,
and that
right.
isn't going to continue when that USAID is taken out of the equation. We need to get much more sensitive to how we do things. It's just not what we do is important, but how we do it is probably more important. Certainly, if you want what you're doing to have a life after you withdraw.
Yeah. It sort of speaks to the idea of ownership, right, and self-ownership and pride in yourself and your own community. I think that's interesting, and the fact that it relates in some way in some ways back to funding and funding mechanisms and limitations and structures, which of course we need, but at the same time, the limitations that can be attached to funding are sometimes the thing that are tripping us up a little bit. I see that sometimes with some of the smaller NGOs who often go from project funding to project funding to project funding, which is obviously necessary and a valuable part of the process. But at the same time, you spoke about it once where you needed to take some funding and you had to kind of change a little bit what you were doing to meet the funder's requirements. And when you're a small NGO, if you do that too often, you start to morph yourself into something that you weren't trying to be in the beginning just to stay alive.
Yeah,
so it is maybe a challenge that we need to overcome. I've seen some examples of unrestricted funding coming into the sector, which there's some great organizations doing some unrestricted funding and having great success with that.
Yeah, well, we can relate to that totally. We obviously went from project funding to project funding of the initial trial of the project. Then we tried to get project funding for the scale up, and we couldn't get it, so we ended up getting two different projects. One of them was completely, really outside of our experience, i.e., working in really, really, really remote areas.
Right.
But we had to do, we had to twist and bend to make it fit. But the key thing we had working in our favor is, as part of this promotional work that we did internationally, we were interviewed by the BBC for a program called In Business, and it was all the host of that program, who was very famous at the time, he's now retired. He was coming to Zambia, and in fact, I met him at the event where this won Product Design of the Year, Design Museum.
Yeah.
Within 3 months of it winning Product Design of the Year, we ditched it. But anyway, he was at that event, and we just met, and he said, "Oh, what do you do?" Of course, we won that award, so he wanted to speak to us. And he happened to be coming to Zambia, within a few months, to do a feature on the energy system in Zambia. Right. And I said, "Well, you'll be going to Victoria Falls, won't you?" He said, "Oh, yes, I will." I said, "Well, that goes right through one of our trial areas. Why don't we meet on the road and I'll take you in?"
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I took him in. We went 50 kilometers on dirt road into where these were being sold.
Yeah.
And he ended up doing a 40-minute feature just on us.
Right.
And a philanthropist heard that broadcast, and she has supported us ever since with non-restricted funding. And that has been transformational. It's kept us going through the troughs and peaks and troughs of project funding. And without that, we would have really struggled. It was trust funding, but it was trust funding almost in the true sense of the word. They trusted us.
Exactly.
They trusted us. We had a set of values that we were working to, and we every few years, it wasn't every year by any means, made a case for some more funding or whatever. And generally speaking, we got it. And there was no massive reporting requirements. In fact, we decided when we submitted the report to them.
Right.
Obviously, if we hadn't done that often enough, they would have asked us. But there was no, there was no stipulation you need to do it quarterly, yearly, or whatever. It was up to us, and that was so brilliant. And made it enabled us to act even more in the way we wanted to act, as a catalyst, and not totally dependent on project funding. And the other thing about project funding, of course, is the criteria for that funding is not laid down by the people who want the funding. It's laid down by the people giving the funding. So often it's very difficult to to make it match what's actually required locally.
Exactly. I mean, it's practically impossible.
Yeah, I mean, what we did a very bold thing initially when we went before we actually moved to Zambia to do the trial. We went on 3 2-week trips in the year before, and again, actually, we were given £15,000 because we gave up our jobs in 2010, in June 2010, because we had these 8,000 people behind us on Facebook, and we couldn't stop. We needed to raise the money to do a trial, and we were given £15,000 by an organisation called Unlimited. Again, it was completely unrestricted. They just thought there was something here that needed a bit of support. Yep. They gave us that £15,000. That kept us going until we actually got some project funding. So and the other thing I was going to say was that we then, in those visits prior to running the trial, we worked with local people to produce a plan. And we produced a plan with no idea where it was going to get funded from.
Right.
We were determined not to start by saying, oh, there's a funding opportunity over here. Why don't we do this? We wanted to start with what we wanted to do. And so we worked and we got this plan in place. And we were very fortunate that as we were doing that, the British government were reviewing its development programs. So the unit in Zambia were redoing their business plan, and they saw our plan and were able to move their plan a bit so that when it landed on their desk, they were able to fund it. But we were very fortunate. I mean, if those things hadn't coincided, our plan would have landed on the desk, and it just wouldn't have fitted their criteria, so it wouldn't have got funded. But we were determined not to be forced into a project by a funding opportunity. We wanted to build the project from the ground up based on what was actually required, or based on what we actually wanted to test. And so we were fortunate that it worked in the way that it did.
See, I think I would call that very entrepreneurial. And the way I mean that is because you weren't there just to do some good, which is a great thing to go and help. You were from the beginning trying to solve a problem. Like you had, from what it seems like to me, you had a desire to solve something in a specific way, and you took the risks and the decisions necessary to do it in that way. And you weren't going to waver from that conviction. And you talk about luck. It's always luck is a big part of it with these kind of things. But at the same time, you are where you are now because of your conviction, right? And the effort and the hard work you all put in to do it. Because at any point you could have compromised from those convictions and done it a different way, but then you wouldn't be where you are now, right? We would not have solved the problem, so to speak. Does that ring true to you?
Yes, yeah, I think it does. But yeah, it does. But we did. What's quite interesting is we were pure, in the sense of what we wanted to do and to get the original plan for the trial in place. And we were lucky we got the funding. Then, when it came to scale up, it didn't work. We had to bend and just take what was given to us, basically, and make the most of it. And as it happened, we proved the product was viable, and we'd redesigned it so that it didn't need any subsidy. So it would have ticked over even without any funding, probably, but it wouldn't have got to where it is today.
Right.
And so we have had to bow to the powers that be, on this journey. but we didn't start by someone saying we need to do more work on ORS and zinc,
Right.
and here's some money, and these are the criteria associated with the money. You can't work in Zambia because it's not in the top 10, etc., etc. We were driven by a mission to solve this particular problem.
Yeah.
I say solved. Obviously, it's not totally solved yet, but we're getting there. I mean, as I said, in 2015, coverage of this medicine was 34%.
Right.
Hopefully, when the results come out very shortly, 5 years on, it will be more like 55% or whatever.
Right.
And then to get to 90%, you halve the death toll right there.
Right.
And of course, you remove a lot of misery of
Right.
kids being undernourished and suffering from chronic diarrhea and all the rest of it.
It's an inspiring story. I'm getting conscious of time now. One of the questions I've asked before, is this question about founderitis. To go through this kind of a journey, it takes a lot of emotional energy and commitment. And I can see by looking through your back history, you've been through this kind of thing. You've founded organizations and you've created things from nothing several times, many times over. Where does that come from, do you think?
I think it comes from a desire to have an impact and to focus on a particular issue. It's very difficult to do that if you're an employee of XYZ organization.
Mm-hmm.
There is a thing called a social entrepreneur, by the way, and they are people who are employed by usually quite large organizations, but they operate a bit like social entrepreneurs, but from within an organization. And with those people, is there a set of rules that they operate by, and one rule is that they don't care that every day they go into work, they don't care if they get fired.
Yes, right. You have to be like that to be able to make change.
Yeah. So that's, I think that's where it comes from, and and a desire to just focus on a particular problem and see if you can make an impact.
And so, given your experience and what you've seen of the challenges over time, changing how we are engaging with those challenges, how those have changed over time. How do you feel about where we are these days? And have you seen things change significantly?
I think things have changed significantly, but I mean, like, there are many more programs now funded, at least by the British government, which go straight to local organisations in developing countries.
Yeah.
But I think there's so much more to be done on the how we do things.
Yeah.
Because even the British government insists by default on branding everything with UK aid. Now, we had to make a special case in the Colalife scale up not to do that.
Not to do that.
The default, it should be the other way around.
Yeah, sure.
Brand it UK aid if it helps you, sort of thing. Not brand it UK aid.
Right.
And when you're told that things need to be branded UK aid, there isn't a caveat saying unless it's unless you don't think it's helpful. You have to challenge that when there's no hook given to you to challenge it and make the case. Unfortunately, we did make the case.
And so we've still got a long way to go, obviously. Yeah, but some things have changed. We've made some progress. Looking forward, are you generally optimistic, or pessimistic?
I'm an optimistic person, but I think changing the way donors operate, I mean, they have changed already,
Mm-hmm.
but in the way that I described earlier. Well, that was just one example. But I think labeling everything locally, um, as a gift from the British people, or is not at all helpful. I mean, it may have a role, let's say, in humanitarians situations,
Right.
but even that is questionable. I mean, more and more humanitarian organisations are giving cash. I mean,
Right.
if you think about what used to happen, you used to have pictures of food being thrown out the back of aircraft. I mean,
Right.
how ridiculous, because that's good. That's a fantastic picture. But
Right.
it's useless. It's a demeaning
Yes.
thing.
Right. Yeah.
When you've got, in many humanitarian situations, a thing that has been damaged most of all is the local economy and local businesses.
Yeah.
So if you can put cash in people's hands so that they can buy the food they want locally and buy the medicines they want, etc., that stimulates the economy. So that is happening,
Yeah.
and that's the sort of change that we need to see in the bilateral aid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, that's a sweeping generalization, but we've got a lot to learn still in how we support um, less developed countries.
No. No. Obviously, the one thing that keeps me optimistic is I cannot get over how quickly things are changing. Whether they be for the better or the worse, things just continue to change and continue to get changed faster and faster. So, I, there's nothing I don't think cannot change in the next few decades. So, I'm optimistic that somehow
So am I. So am I. But yeah, it won't. There needs to be. I mean, ORSZCO is trying to do this. ORSZCO is
yes.
trying to change the way um, you know people see diarrhea treatment, including WHO and
Mm-hmm.
big
Yep.
donors. And it's it's a thankless task, I can tell you.
Yeah.
Just trying to get change. But we keep going.
No. And on that, I think we'll try to wrap this up. Again, it's an incredible journey. I thank you so much for taking the time for a second time to share that story with me and my community. I'm sure it will go a long way to inspiring others.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm honoured that I was chosen. Thank you very much indeed.
Great. If people wanted to follow your work or get in touch, how can they best do that?
Well, ORSZCO is now the point of contact. The
Okay.
Colalife website is staying there
Mm-hmm.
as an archive because it's linked. We've had various publications published or
Mm-hmm.
papers published, and they link back to the website. So that's all staying there. But the interactive element to what we're doing will all be over at ORSZCO, and that's ORSZCO pack,
Mm-hmm.
ORSZCopac.org, and you can sign up there to a mailing list just to keep tabs on what's happening. The mailing list is like low volume, between 4 and 10 emails a year, so you won't be overwhelmed, but that'll keep you
Okay.
informed about what we're doing.
Okay. I will add that in the comments down below. Simon, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and an honor talking to you. I wish you the best, and I hope that we can have another conversation sometime in the future to see how things are going with ORSZCO. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Anton. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.